Hey everybody, this is Krystal from Girl Who Scraps, and today I wanted to share a video with you guys that shows the process, or at least a description of how to make this handmade, homemade album or scrapbook or journal, whatever you want to use it for. My boyfriend Jim made this for me for Christmas this past year, and he is going to share also after I'm done on how to make this, how he actually went through the process of making it, and hopefully inspire you guys to maybe make your own, or maybe your boyfriend or husband will watch this and want to make you an album. You can use this for lots of things. Like I said, it can be a scrapbook, it can be a photo album. I'm going to use it for an inspiration album where I put just different sheets of paper that I print out from my computer of ideas in these 8.5 by 11 photo sheets, photo page protectors. So that's what I'm going to use mine for, but again, use your imagination and use it for anything. So I'm going to share with you the materials that are needed to make this, and I will also have them listed out on the blog, so you can, head over there and get everything in writing and probably a little bit more explanation. And also the process will be over on the blog, girlwhoscraps.blogspot.com. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to need to purchase or find from your house is the paneling, the front and the back cover for your album. And these are 2 wood panels. These have been spray painted, and I'll get into that later. These measure 12 by 12, and then you also need a panel for your spine. And this was originally 6 by 12, but it's been cut with a saw to be 3 by 12 inches. So those are the materials that you'll need for the cover, the back cover, and the spine. Okay, so the next thing that you will need to put this album together is hinges. And you will need a total of 4 hinges, 2 for the front and 2 for the back. You may need to buy screws for these, and what you want to watch out for is that the screws are not too long and they don't go through the wood. You don't want them sticking out in the front cover. Of course, that's not going to be very attractive, and that's going to hurt you. So what Jim had to do was he did have to file some of the screws down. So that may be an option that you will have to do. And also, if you choose to put letters on the front of your album, you will need screws for that. So don't forget that step. But we'll talk more about that later. So you will also need something to bind the album with to hold on to these rings. So Jim used some leather cord that he picked up at Michael's. And we will talk about the stitching later, but you need about maybe 24 to 36 inches of this. That may be too much, but that's a safe amount to have to be able to bind it all the way through. Also, you'll need these book binding rings. These are very common. You can find these at Staples, you can find these at Michael's, and probably lots of other places. These are what I use to hold the page protectors in. So, the next thing that you'll need is page protectors, or something to go in your album. Now, this album is 12 by 12, the boards are. However, when I put my 12 by 12 page protectors in here from American Crafts, they were too big because they have about 1/2 inch to 1 inch along the spine right here of the page protector. Now, that part, whenever you close your album, would stick out, a 1/2 inch or so. I didn't like that because I didn't want the end of my pages to get bent or anything from the cover. So what I decided to do is just make this an 8.5 by 11 album. These are easier to find, this size page protector, and that's going to work fine for me, for what I'm going to use this for. Moving on, the next thing that you will need, and this is optional, is Jim put letters on here. These are the first letter of each of our name, Jim, Krystal. So that's optional. You can choose to do that. You can choose to leave it off. You can choose a different shape, etc. But these are what we use. You can get these at Michael's. And the final thing that you will need is something to decorate your book or album with. This is a textured spray paint that was found at Michael's. It kind of feels like gravel, sort of. It's bumpy and it has a really nice texture. And 1 can was enough to cover the entire album. Also, if you want to cover the inside of the album, you can do that too. I plan on painting it with just some regular acrylic paint. You will need a drill or screwdriver, preferably a drill, to drill the screws in. And that is all for your supplies. Now Jim is going to talk about the process of putting this album together.
Hi, my name's Jim. I am Krystal's fiance. That does not make me the guy who scraps, though, unfortunately. I built this book, or I should say I assembled it, from scratch. For the most part, it was my own idea. I wanted to make her something that was related to her hobby, but still something that she could use. So I was at Michael's with her one day, and I saw the 12 by 12 pieces of plywood that they had, and they have different thicknesses. I think you can get 1/4 inch all the way to 1/2 inch. So 1/4 inch, 3/8, so on and so forth. I forget all the different thicknesses they had. I believe this is 3/8 inch. And I saw the 12 inch by 12 inch squares, and I thought, hey, scrapbook layouts are 12 by 12 usually, and that would be cool to make a book out of. The problem I came across, I found out after the fact, is that I didn't put the cover pieces far enough away from the spine to actually hold a 12 by 12 sheet protector on the book rings. So if you did this yourself, you could use maybe smaller book rings or whatnot to hold the pages closer in, or use longer hinges to hold the cover sheets farther out, or both. I kind of like the covers where they are, with the length of the hinges, because the hinges are slightly exposed to just kind of show the more like handmade look to it, the more industrial look. But they're not too long. When I was at the hardware store, I got these at Ace Hardware. The hinge choices I had were anywhere from slightly shorter than this all the way up to maybe even twice the length. Anyway, I got the wood together. The spine piece here, it's kind of hard to notice with the book rings in the way, but it's actually just a little bit wider on one end than the other, because it was actually a 6 inch by 12 inch piece that I cut in half lengthwise. After I got all these assembled, or all these pieces cut, I sanded down the surfaces of the outside of the covers and the back of the spine. And I sanded down every edge of every piece with sandpaper. I used a rougher grit, 120 grit, I believe, to sand the edges. I sanded the surfaces to help the paint stick better, because I did not use a primer. And I sanded the edges just so that they wouldn't have that rough, unfinished edge that some plywood pieces can have. After I got all the wood sanded, I used a textured spray paint that I got at Michael's, a gray color for the cover and spine pieces, and I used a darker gray color for the lettering. Took about a day for that to dry. After it was dried, I attached the hinges to the spine and the covers, and then once I had an actual book feel to it, I put the letters on the inside of the front cover backwards and traced them. You can see the J's outlined in a few different areas here to try to get a feel for where I wanted them. And then I put the screws through, and when they came through the front side, I was able to screw them into the back of the letters. So these letters are actually screwed on. Now, this could be done a number of different ways. I know that there are different types of glues or other adhesives you could use, and maybe put the letters on before painting with like a glue or whatnot and paint over them. They could all be the same color. Or depending on how you decorate the cover, you would have different options available for attaching the letters. I decided to go with screws because at the time I thought it'd be a good way to to attach them to the cover. Turns out after the fact I needed to go to the hardware store to buy more screws because I used some of my screws on the letters and then didn't have enough for the hinges. A side note to that, because I used a thinner piece of plywood, all the screws I had that came with the hinge packages and all the screws I bought after the fact were actually too long. I was lucky enough to have a file in my toolbox, so I actually, using the file and a pair of pliers, filed the tips off of all of the screws, pre-drilled the holes, and then drilled the screws into the holes to hold in all of the hinges so that the screws would not come out the other side. Once I got all the painting, all the lettering, and all the hinges attached and done and dried, I drilled 4 holes per book ring through the spine of the book and fed this leather cord through the holes. On the back side, it looks just like an alternating weaving pattern, but on the inside, as I'm sure you've seen as I flip this over, we actually have a crisscross pattern. And what happened here is, at first, I figured I would drill a hole above and below where I wanted the book ring and feed a piece of the cord through and attach the book ring, but I realized the book ring would move up and down a lot more if I had done that. So what I did instead is I went with a crosshatch. So the book ring has to stay roughly in this area. They're somewhat loose, but because there's 3 of them and they're attached to the page protectors, they do a pretty good job of not going up and down too much. Anyway, some of my holes go through the unused screw holes of the hinges. Some don't, they're freestanding. I used this space here to determine where I wanted these. Within a square, I crisscrossed the cord, and then when coming out the back side, I just moved up to the next set. So there would be a cross here, there's a cross here, and there's a cross here. The cord itself I didn't have, so I got that at Michael's as well. I bought an entire spool of it, so I have a lot left over for later projects probably, or for any scrapping projects that Krystal wants to use them for. Once I was done with that, I started using the page protectors in here to make sure I had everything lined up correctly. I did most of this project freehand. I did not do very much measuring. It wasn't until after the fact, though, that I realized that I was using her 8.5 by 11 page protectors and that they actually fit better than the 12 by 12. My original intent behind this was to use 12-inch by 12-inch pieces of plywood for a 12 by 12 album, but when you factor in that the hinges don't hold the covers out that far, you end up with a problem where 12-inch paper actually hangs out farther from the spine than the covers do. So the 8.5 by 11 paper fits a lot better. It gives a little bit of space below and above because 11 inches is shorter than 12 inches. And it gives plenty of space over to the right where if the inside of the covers become decorated, that would be visible, and plenty of space for turning the pages.